Paul Hayward.
Thank you, Mr Gray, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Winchester on securing this debate. It's an important subject, and a week when we've seen the Prime Minister make two, I think, very important announcements as well. And at a time when we see the Liberal Democrats taking our policies that were in my manifesto and planting a nice yellow flag on them as though they've always owned them, I want to make sure that we claim both these policies as being born, brought to fruition, made aware, brought to life within the Conservative Party with a big blue sticker on them. And I'm proud of what this party has done for first-time buyers, not just since I have been an MP, but since I was born, since the party was founded even. We've always been the party of the first-time buyer, and I make no apology for that, and I'm proud of it. And I know our critics, sadly they couldn't arrive today, but our critics normally say that somehow we are opposed to social housing, that we look down upon it. Far from it. We see, as my honourable friend from Milton Keynes and South East pointed out, the importance of a tenancy escalator. We see social housing as a springboard, a trampoline, not quicksand from which you should never escape. There's a reason for this, that it is in our party's DNA. And that's because we are real people with lived experiences. On my family, on my mother's side, I had relatives living in somewhere called Myrtle Gardens, a modernist estate in the heart of Liverpool, rather like the Karl Marxhof in Vienna, but possibly more left-wing in that part of Liverpool. And it was a model of its time in the 1930s, but by the time we got to the 1980s and the Toxteth riots, it was a shadow of its former self. And what happened? Along came Lord Hazeltine. He made sure that Myrtle Gardens was rebuilt, sold off to local people at prices they could afford. It turned that estate around. In the heart of Liverpool, we saw the Conservative DNA flickering, and we should be proud of that as well, because council estates should be more than just assemblages of houses where we put people for social engineering purposes, as so many on the left have always sought to do. What I have found, looking around my own home village of Weaverham, where so many people bought their houses in the 1980s, it's a village that was two-thirds council estates, mostly for working in the local ICI plant, was that they built their community from within the houses that they bought. They didn't just rely on someone else to do it for them. And it's clear, though, now that after 13 years of Labour rule, the challenges we face are far, far different. As other speakers have pointed out, the number of first-time buyers is falling sharply. From 50% of all house buyers in May 2009 being first-time buyers, only 20% are now. The Honourable Member for South East Cornwall cited the figure of the age of 35 for being the average age of the first-time buyer. I heard 37, so we can have an upwards bid maybe. Maybe we'll hear a higher number from the Labour Party opposite. I doubt it, perhaps, but that's their legacy. And perhaps the most shocking legacy of all that we had to inherit was 50,000 people who were statutorily homeless. And that's a figure that we don't talk about often enough. I remember for York Out and pointed it out. But to inherit 50,000 people who, because of the fact that the social housing market was not working as it should do, were trapped in temporary substandard accommodation, is not a legacy that I think the Labour Party should be proud of for one single second. And it's no wonder that we have groups like Priced Out who are campaigning that my generation, the 20 to 35-year-olds, are being priced out of the housing market, unable to afford their house for the first time. I was fortunate. I think I bought in the last housing development in Greater London when prices were still under 100,000. I got in just in time. I was fortunate. Another year or two later, I would be the sort of sofa surfer the member for Winchester is now talking about. And why should it be that my generation should be denied opportunities that previous generations have had? We should be enabling people, not telling them how to live their lives, in my view. And this is a cultural battle, as much as a political or an economic one, because it is about the belief that housing policy is somehow about social engineering. It most certainly is not. It's about enabling people to choose how to live their lives. Home ownership is a natural objective for 86% of people, according to the DCLG. And we shouldn't sneer at that or think that somehow that prevents us from our wider dreams of somehow creating a new Jerusalem. Far from it. True communities come out of families and people having a stake in the societies that they live in. And that's where I think the nub is in terms of policy. And when I hear criticism from the left of our policy on new buy, I want to take them to Westminster Gardens in Bispham in my constituency, or Hawley Gardens in Thornton in my constituency, and show them, because the criticism I hear is that we're doing this just for the sake of the house builders. Well, let me take them round these new estates. Westminster Gardens was being built 5 years ago when I was first elected to fight the seat. It is still being built. It is what is called a stalled development. And to think that somehow we are just trying to benefit the house builders, go and speak to the residents of that estate and find out what is actually going on there. Because a stalled development means a local council won't adopt the roads. So you're left with substandard paving, substandard road quality. You're left with dangers to small children on a building site. You're left with higher road traffic accidents and injuries. And to merely say, oh, you're just doing it for the sake of the house builders, that shows once again the failure of the left to actually engage with people's lives as they are lived. Once again, it's just seeing the schematics. And that, I think, is deeply unfair on the people who are making an investment in those estates and want to see the estates completed. More concerning still, though, is the way in which our social housing market is blocked up, as the Honourable Gentleman was indicating earlier. We have very many social tenants now who are not moving through the system. And that's why we have these large numbers stuck in temporary accommodation, because there isn't sufficient turnover. Labour have destroyed almost the right to buy, in my view, by tweaking the criteria, lowering the thresholds, trying to stop people buying their own council homes. Not because, I'm sure they would pay lip service to the concept, but they don't believe in their hearts that owning your own home is a good thing. They look upon it with suspicion, with distaste and distrust almost. And that really angers me. I could easily, we could do the cheap politics today and talk about union leaders living. Well, I'm sure you'll get your chance to have a go at me at a later date, and I look forward to hearing about it. But since you encouraged me about union leaders occupying social housing, about the fact that here in the Royal Borough of Westminster, there are 2,000 social tenants who own more than I do as a Member of Parliament. And maybe that should give us pause for thought. Just maybe we ought to reconsider how we use social housing and what it's there for. I don't think it's there to give Bob Crow a pleasant place for life, in my view. And the fact, I'm sure I agree, and Charlie, and maybe we might like to see a gesture from the leader of the RMT as to what he's going to do in future. But we do need to use our social housing stock better, and that's why I so welcome what the Prime Minister has announced on enhancing right to buy, because we now have to start to see our social housing stock as not ghettos that we create. When I first moved into London in this housing development I referred to, as ever, the housing developer built the required proportion of affordable housing at the end of the cul-de-sac. So you had 2 rows that were the cheapo housing, as it were. And it became ghettoised and stigmatised, as is always the case. We need to move beyond that, to seeing social housing as a stock, a resource for the use of the community, not areas of a town or a village that somehow are regarded as somehow less worthy. And that's always been my concern about the social engineering aspect of housing policy, that so many opposite seem to want it to create communities that they can then somehow control. That strikes me as desperately, desperately wrong. And so I will happily give way. Yes?
I'm giving way, and I'm perhaps enjoying is the wrong word, but I'm listening with interest to his comments. But could he, in his tour de force through the history of the left and its attitude to social housing, perhaps going back to Nye Bevan and the great period of the invention of social housing in the aftermath of the Second World War, point to where and who it is who thinks of social housing on the left in the Labour Party as just a matter of social engineering?
God, first-time buyers, of course.
Indeed,
Well,
I'm very
back
grateful
to
to
the-
the gentleman for mentioning Nine Bevan, because in the interest of brevity, I crossed out my paragraph on Nine Bevan, so I shall reintroduce it into the speech. It was well known that what Nine Bevan wanted to do, what Nine Bevan...
Order. I suggest the Honourable Gentleman might like to return to the subject under debate, namely government help for first-time buyers. I think Nai Bevan can wait for some other time.
Indeed, yes. Thank you. I shall bear that advice in mind. Looking forward to how I think we need to utilise the receipts from the new Right to Buy initiative. I think it is vital that they are reinvested in affordable rented social housing, as I know is being made clear, because the key aspect of this, I think, is the turnover of tenants in social housing, that there needs to be this escalator, that you may start off in a vulnerable situation, needing full tenancies, but you need to be able to move swiftly and quickly on, and escalating as high up as you wish to go, as one wishes to go, rather. And if that leads to home ownership, then that is a good thing. But we need to have that fluidity within the social housing market. That is what we have not had under any government, I would suggest. So the changes that the government are announcing this week, and indeed that have been contained in last year's Housing Green Paper, mark the start of trying to regard our housing stock as an asset for the whole community that is not geographically restricted, in my view. Two of my favourite architects are Alison and Peter Smithson, a married couple who built lots of modernist, probably many in Milton Keynes for that fact. But they were quite bizarre in some of their views, and they had a vision for housing where they wanted to see, and I quote, the rubbish chute replace the village pump. Somehow they believed that putting us all in high-rise blocks would somehow enhance the bonds of community. Well, as a Conservative, I know after... Yes.
But I fear he's launching into something of a tour de force around the whole housing policy. And actually, we have to focus. There are two other honourable members trying to catch my eye before I call the front benches. And perhaps he could focus attention specifically on government help for first-time buyers, and also possibly out of courtesy to the other two honourable members, maybe quite soon he might want to wind up his remarks.
Right. Thank you very much for that help. I shall therefore wind to an end and just finish by quoting one of our predecessors, Mr. David Eccles, the Member of Parliament for Chippenham in 1948. He said, "Men are partly selfish and partly idealist. They give their best when they believe they have a reasonable chance to put something in their pockets to realise a fragment of their dreams. That is what the government have been doing. That is what we need to keep on doing. And I give way, or let the two following members have their chance." Thank you.
Mark Pawsey.